One of the first things I wanted to talk about is this Isaac Chotiner article, because this is actually, I mean, Isaac Chotiner is very good at just like ripping people apart in the by just simply asking questions, and also asking follow-up questions. He's done this many times with like radical settlers and things of that nature, right? And so I think it's good for getting people on board. I think it's good for getting people to understand what's going on, especially people that are still in the margins or whatever, right? I'm going to cover this because I saw Chris Hayes say something that I disagree with, even though Chris Hayes is a Hasanabi head, and much love to Chris Hayes. He basically he tweeted out this this interview that Isaac Chotiner did. Where is it? I replied to him, but I don't know where his comment is. I don't know. Maybe did he delete it? Oh, here it is. He said, this interview is the first time I felt like I had any understanding of what the problem of the GHF was supposed to solve. And it's a political one. A big part of Netanyahu's coalition wants zero aid entering Gaza. And I think this kind of like takes the responsibility away from the United States of America here. And so I replied to him. I said, GHF is as American as the fake aid peer. It is all crafted to offer plausible deniability to Israel's deliberate starvation policies in the eyes of NGOs/media. It's clearly worked on some, since they're only realizing it now. Okay? So without further ado, and I will talk about Bernie Sanders as like genocide is a legal term take later. Let's get into it. How the Israeli right explains the aid disaster it created. The fiercest defenders of Netanyahu's war in Gaza continue to insist that Palestinians aren't starving. Last week, in a piece for The Guardian, Nick Maynard, a volunteer surgeon at a hospital in southern Gaza, wrote, "I've just finished operating on another severely malnourished young teenager. A 7-month-old baby lies in our pediatric intensive care unit, so tiny and malnourished that I initially mistook her for a newborn. The phrase skin and bones doesn't do justice the way her body has been ravaged. She is literally wasting away before our eyes, and despite our best efforts, we are powerless to save her. The humanitarian situation in Gaza, which was already dire, deteriorated even further in July, with 63 people, including 25 children, dying from malnutrition-related causes, according to the World Health Organization. This past weekend, Israel announced that it would pause some military activity in the territory to allow more aid in, although it remains unclear how long that pause will last. As more reports and images of emaciated children emerge from Gaza, close Israeli allies such as France and the United Kingdom have issued harsh critiques, calling the current humanitarian situation a catastrophe. Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, announced that his country would become the first member of the G7 to recognize a Palestinian state, and Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, also pointed to do so unless Israel agrees to a ceasefire. On Monday, even President Trump acknowledged that children were going hungry. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, meanwhile, has continued to insist there is no starvation in Gaza. 2 Israeli human rights groups have begun referring to Israel's actions as genocide. The scale of the crisis has also caused a number of American politicians and commentators, including defenders of the war, to argue that more aid needs to be allowed into the territory or that the war itself has become unjust. Amit Segal, the chief political correspondent for Israel's Channel 12, is widely considered one of the country's most influential journalists. Segal is a prominent defender of the Netanyahu government. He has written on topics such as what he calls the settler violence scam and the need to annex parts of Gaza. This man is a chief Hasbarist, a chief genocide defender. Okay, Amit Segal. Important. This is who Isaac Chotiner is interviewing. Okay. Last week, he wrote a piece for the Free Press in which he said that Gaza may well be approaching a real hunger crisis. Now, the Free Press is directly an arm of the Israeli mouthpiece. Okay. The Free Press, Barry Weiss's operation, works in tandem with the Israeli government. Okay. Just so you understand. So when you hear something from Barry Weiss's outlet, the Free Press, understand that that is the Israeli government's position that is being massaged for the Western audience. You could say that the New York Times plays a similar role as well, but the Free Press is playing an even more direct role in this process. This is not like a conspiracy theory. This is not me being like a fabulist at all. It is straightforwardly an arm of Western propaganda for the Israeli state. Okay, Dropsite did extensive coverage on this. A pro-Israel nonprofit is funneling news content through Barry Weiss's Free Press. As Weiss's news organization explores a deal to sell to CBS, much of its content on the Middle East is produced by a shadowy think tank tied to pro-Israel advocacy. And now she's getting $200 million in a potential CBS merger as CBS moves further in the right-wing direction. Just understand how connected and intertwined this kind of nefarious propaganda is. This is an influence peddling operation to try and present what Israel is doing as not war crimes, but simply a real need for Israel's violence, a real need for Israel's brutality. And they are directly, through funding measures, insidiously connected to the Israeli state as well. We'll cover that later. But understand that when they say, oh, this is just a sequence of mistakes, when Free Press writes a sequence of mistakes that has led to the real hunger crisis, that is not a mistake at all. That is the new mechanism of propaganda for the Western world that Israel is trying to dish out. He approvingly quoted the Israeli journalist Haviv Retik Gur, who said, it's hard to convince Israelis of that because literally everything said to them for 22 months on this topic has been a fiction. He also wrote that without Hamas's gleeful hoarding of food, again, a lie, Gaza would not be facing the current food shortage. The following day, Reuters reported that an analysis conducted by USAID found no evidence of systematic theft of U.S. humanitarian supplies by Hamas. Another report in the Times said that Israeli officials privately agree that Hamas has not systematically looted United Nations aid, directly contradicting a central talking point in the Israeli war effort. So, understand that the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation was not launched out of nowhere. This was a deliberate effort created by the Israeli government and the American government, and crafted almost entirely by the Boston Consulting Group, utilizing mercenaries that were already in operation in the Gaza Strip, American mercenaries, to basically create these aid traps, okay? Aid traps that play a role in PR for Israel. Because as I've said before, the one thing that all of these NGOs will point to as a non-starter is denial of aid, okay? Even if, like Human Rights Watch, for example, that was founded by a Holocaust survivor who literally after October 7 said Israel's actions are not genocidal, why did he change his attitude? Because he saw and recognized that what Israel was doing was genocidal. Why did he recognize that? He recognized it because Israel had denied aid. You can always contextualize all of the death and destruction by simply claiming that this is collateral damage. You can say 60,000 deaths, even though the number is far higher. 18,000 children have been slaughtered mercilessly by Israel, but that's actually war casualties. That's just collateral damage in precise targeting operations that are sometimes imprecise. There is a legal way to engage with bombing campaigns, but there is no legal defense for denial of aid. When you are the belligerent occupier over 2 million populated open air prison, if you refuse to render aid to the civilian population, it's over. Okay? There is no defense of that whatsoever under any circumstance. Obviously, we all consider Israel's bombing campaigns to also be illegal too, and it is illegal because it's an ethnic cleansing operation, but denial of aid is impossible to defend under any circumstance. It is a mass starvation, mass deprivation campaign specifically to kill as many civilians as possible. This is precisely the reason why NGOs very quickly said, nope, it's over. We know exactly what's going on. This is genocide. So in an effort to defend against that in the international legal community, America tried to cook up a scheme. It was called the Gaza Aid Pier, if you recall. It was a $250 million failure. But it actually wasn't a failure at all from America's interests. America wanted Israel to continue doing its ethnic cleansing campaign. This was under Biden, remember. But they wanted to make sure that there wasn't too much legal scrutiny over Israel's behavior, so they made it seem as though Israel was allowing America to bring in aid. That pier never actually brought in aid at all, as a matter of fact. It was not created to bring in aid, because if you wanted to bring in aid, you would just tell Israel to continue bringing trucks of aid that were fucking lined up at the Gaza envelope on the other side of the border. And the Gaza Aid Pier failed numerous times, cost $250 million, but the sole purpose of it wasn't to actually bring in aid to the Palestinian population living in Gaza. The sole purpose of it was to say, see, Israel is letting us bring in aid. I would say the same thing about the World Central Kitchen. As a matter of fact, before Israel actually killed the World Central Kitchen aid workers, the reason for why World Central Kitchen was allowed to render aid was simply to say, no, we are letting in some aid. Like, you don't understand. You can't claim that we're not letting in any aid. See, this is a very famous liberal chef, Jose Andres, that is actually bringing in aid. Okay? It's just PR. And the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is the worst, most insidious version of this kind of PR, because the aid delivery mechanism was basically created to kill more Palestinian civilians that are desperately trying to get a crumb of aid. It was a trap. And it's not just my assessment. We kept saying over and over again, basically highlighting Palestinians, describing their own situation in the Gaza Strip. There were plenty of journalists who covered it, Palestinian journalists who covered it, and then Western journalists who highlighted the Palestinian journalists talking about what the GHF was actually doing. Yeah, it's not the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, it's the Gaza Holocaust Front, basically. And for months, the international humanitarian rights organizations panned America and Israel. They bouldered America and Israel. They said this is illegal. It's perfidy, which it is. Okay? Designing a military occupation front as a distribution of aid delivery is illegal under international law. Aid needs to be rendered by third parties that are uninvolved with this conflict. And yet Israel and America designed this scheme with Boston Consulting Group in an effort to basically continue this ethnic cleansing operation. Having said that, however, people are finally coming to that reality only after the fact. Okay? I recently spoke on the phone with Segal during our conversation, which has been edited for length and clarity. We discussed his wavering opinion on whether there is hunger in Gaza, his support for Trump's plan to develop Gaza without Palestinians, and just how much power the extreme right has over the Israeli government. For Americans, why won't you just let BCG off the hook, dude? What do you mean? Boston Consulting Group played a massive role in this. Boston Consultancy Group is one of these consulting groups like Bain or what is it? The one, Pricewaterhouse Cooper, McKinsey. These are all consulting groups, and Boston Consulting Group was a part of the planning procedure for this Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. Anyway, for Americans who might not know your work, you're often talked about as someone who's very familiar with Netanyahu's thinking. Are you in touch with? Yeah, that's correct. I'm not the mouthpiece of Netanyahu. I'm a right-winger, but not more than this. I speak only for myself. I just meant that people say that you understand his thinking and have good source in the government. I wouldn't deny it. Yes. So tell me, what caused you to write this piece for the Free Press saying that there was grave concern about the food situation in Gaza? So first of all, I don't think there is hunger in Gaza. I want to put that first and foremost. You don't think there's hunger in Gaza, says Isaac? Segal responds, I don't think there is hunger campaign that Hamas runs in the international media is anything remotely connected to the truth. However, I do think there's a situation that can actually deteriorate to something like this. For the past 22 months, Hamas has been running a hunger campaign in Gaza. Israelis and maybe some Americans are wary of these accusations because they know it's propaganda. The fact that there is developing crisis does not emanate from Israeli decisions, but a cynical game played by Hamas and the United Nations. This man, Benjamin Netanyahu's mouthpiece in Israeli media, is directly saying that Hamas and the United Nations are actually depriving the Palestinian population of aid. And it's not actually Israel's design. It's actually the United Nations collaborating with Hamas. The UN is Hamas. If you want to understand like where Israeli society is at this point, this is not an extreme position. Okay? This is not an out there far right position. There are a lot of fucking people in Israeli society who unironically believe this. And there are a lot of people who defend Israel who unironically believe this in the West. Okay? This is complete nonsense. It's completely psychopathic. However, Israel will be blamed for it. That's why I want Israel to be wise and not only be just. Just to be clear, your article does talk about a hunger crisis in Gaza. Developing. The piece is titled "The Price of Flour Shows the Hunger Crisis in Gaza." There are reports of starvation deaths in Gaza. Are you denying those? I doubt 90% of it. I can't tell you that it doesn't exist in specific places or specific people, but I don't think that the numbers Hamas and the international media quote are the numbers. One of the things that your piece says is that essentially for the entire duration of the war, there have been false warnings about a hunger crisis. Why do you think the warnings were false previously? Hamas tried to depict a picture that does not exist. There was no hunger in Gaza. For years, Hamas has claimed that Gaza is starving. Hamas always used this weapon of alleged hunger in order to get more humanitarian aid. A UN study from 2022 prior to the war found that more than 3/4 of the Palestinian families reduced the number of meals they consume because of a lack of food. So this is even before October 7. How could that have happened? How could that have happened if Israel does not have complete control over the Gaza Strip, even prior to October 7? It's because Israel does have complete control over what kind of food is allowed into the Gaza Strip. At times, they have quite literally stopped cookies from going into the Gaza Strip. The sex pest that I was previously referencing, sex pestiny, has actively lied at the behest of the Israeli state to claim that Hamas has the capacity to actually take cookies and turn them into rocket fuel. Okay? That is how fucking stupid the argument is. That they were saying we're not letting in cookies into the Gaza Strip because they can turn cookies into rocket fuel. They can turn the sugar in the cookies into rocket fuel by, I guess, by way of alchemy. That's real. That's a real thing.
When the population has always had a calorie surplus.
Yeah, even the diet
calorie surplus.
They literally have. That's why when the famine started, when all the people were moved, I believe it was UNRWA that made the statement that this is a region that has never experienced hunger before.
That's what's so infuriating.
And that's also why Finkelstein got mad, because if you try to say, really, wait, these people are starving? By what metric? You can't find
that's what's so infuriating, Stephen, is that you want to start counting calories and try to discover whether they have a surplus or not, when you're missing the fact that Israel getting to decide what food gets into Gaza is itself outrageous.
Right.
One people does not get to control whether another side gets to have cookies for their children,
and you know
or potato chips or sodas. You don't get to do that. That's a level of dominance and oppression that is unacceptable.
But you're not capable of having it because you won't even admit why the blockade exists. So you don't even deserve to be in that.
What do you want him to admit? What do you want him to admit?
Why is there a blockade in Gaza?
Yeah, you tell me.
Why is there a blockade in Gaza?
When you look at the fact that Israel is preventing cookies from going into Gaza, you know that it's not motivated by military.
Why were cookies being prevented from going in?
And
what were custom rockets fueled with?
Yeah, with cookies? Yeah.
With sugar and fertilizer. Yes, that's how they made the early rockets, the first generation that was literally used.
We're going to deny Palestinians in Gaza sugar because it might be used.
This wasn't enough for people to go, hey man, I think you're out of your fucking mind and you're simply just repeating whatever the fuck Israel has claimed as a verifiable truth. There is no mechanism to turn the sugar inside of cookies into rocket fuel, okay? And if that was the case, then Israel would not have allowed cookies to ever enter the Gaza Strip, which they did. Why did they let it enter the Gaza Strip? Well, they did because John Kerry saw that it was actually not allowed. And he was like, what the fuck are you guys doing? Why won't you let pasta into the strip? And then they were like, oops, okay, I guess we'll let some pasta into the Gaza Strip. I'm mentioning all of this because, I mean, there's a purpose for why I'm mentioning this, okay? The reason why I'm mentioning it is because Israel makes ridiculous claims for every single point of oppression when they are talking to the Western world. When you actually listen to what they say in Hebrew, they're pretty open about it. The same person that speaks, the same Israeli American, for example, that speaks very differently when they are talking in English will then literally turn around in Hebrew and be like, this is awesome. We love that we're starving these people and they're not even people at all. But in English, they'll be like, oh, yeah, there is a little bit of a starvation, I guess, taking place, so we have to do something about it. Oops. This is not like ridiculous. I mean, look at Benjamin Netanyahu. Benjamin Netanyahu released a statement in Hebrew the other day where he openly stated, oh, we have to let in some aid. I'm really sorry. We have to let in a modicum of aid because people are getting really mad at us.
Well, first of all, he's not allowed back in because he's more sophisticated.
Stephen, you might know.
But again, he's not going to admit it. I just want to be clear another time. Another thing you're not going to admit. Why does the blockade exist? It's literally just because of the evil Jews trying to...
Anyway, it's just so stupid. Let's continue. The Times reported that at least 20 Palestinian children had died from malnutrition and dehydration. So we're not denying that people have died, right? No, we do not deny that people died. We are just not sure that people died from dehydration or starvation. That report I just quoted was from March of 2024. I see. I beg to differ with the New York Times because the New York Times bases its reports on Hamas sources. The New York Times is Hamas. The New York Times is the most pro-Israel outlet in the Western world alongside the BBC. And these guys are saying the New York Times is Hamas. The New York Times relies heavily on stringers in Gaza that have two options, either report what Hamas wants or die. And I blame the New York Times for this. The head of the legal department of the New York Times told me, how can you blame us for writing what Hamas wants? Our journalists died because in the past they reported things that Hamas didn't like. This is a fucking lie. That person told you this on the record. They wanted to sue me when I claimed that they relied on stringers who collaborated with Hamas. So they told you this privately. Yeah, you can quote it. David McCraw, the lead newsroom lawyer at the New York Times, was identified to me later by Segal as the person who allegedly said this. McCraw told the New Yorker, I never said any of that. We never threatened to sue him, and our journalists have not been killed by Hamas. In 2023, McCraw asked Segal to make corrections to some statements he had made on social media, including that the Times employed ISIS-embedded stringers. So even if we take into account the fact that 20 children died to dehydration, which I doubt, and which the IDF doubts, there is no way to double-check it. And then in parentheses, in the past several days, a number of news organizations have called on Israel to allow international reporters to enter Gaza, something that it has thus far largely restricted them from doing. What can make hunger in Gaza is the unholy coalition between the UN and Hamas. Each and every organization in Gaza has to pay at least 15 to 20% of the humanitarian aid directly into the pockets of Hamas. Hamas. We have to starve the Gazan children because Hamas. The UN is Hamas. The New York Times is Hamas. Everyone is Hamas. Sometimes the fucking Israeli hostages that were released are also Hamas. Everyone is Hamas. The IDF is Hamas at times. Everyone is Hamas. This is not a sustainable worldview. Okay? It's not. It's ridiculous. And it's been ridiculous since day one, especially when you realize that what they're talking about when they say Hamas is the understandable notion that Palestinians want liberty. They want freedom. They want sovereignty. That is what Israeli society broadly declares as Hamas. Anyone and everyone who opposes Israel's death and destruction campaign is Hamas. Yeah, by the way, Segal literally is calling the New York Times Hamas. Amit Segal, the New York Times' campaign to prop up Hamas. The New York Times caused a stir by anonymously quoting two senior Israeli military officials who claim that the IDF has no proof of Hamas systematically stealing aid from the UN. But as is often the case with the Times report on the war in Gaza, this one should be taken with far more than a grain of salt. I once called an Israeli politician to inform him he'd been caught red-handed voting twice in the parliament. The legislator immediately denied it. That's not true, he protested, but there's camera footage, I said. Who are you going to believe, he snapped, me or the camera? Anyway, this is just a long, convoluted way to say that the New York Times is relying on Hamas once again, which, again, you need to understand something, okay? You need to understand something. Hamas sources are 100% more reliable about what's going on in Gaza than Israel is. Israel has a track record of consistently lying about everything. Hamas does not have that same track record. They cannot afford to lie about shit. And even though they do not lie about things, people still don't treat what their statements look like as the truth. It is ridiculous, okay? And I'll give you the example. The greatest example of this is the Palestinian Health Ministry in Gaza, okay? The Gazan Health Ministry's estimates of death and destruction is incredibly conservative, okay? It is incredibly conservative. It is an undercount by hundreds of thousands at this point. Okay. The number that you hear all the time is like, oh, 60,000, 18,000 children. We all at this point know it is a severe undercount. But you know who actually, on the one hand, says this is the Hamas Health Ministry's numbers, while simultaneously uses said Hamas Health Ministry numbers? The Israeli government and also the American State Department. Every single international human rights organization has double and triple checked previous Gazan Health Ministry numbers in the past and have found them to be usually undercounts, okay? The UN has done so, and that is precisely the reason why they are incredibly reliable as a means of understanding the situation on the ground. They are so reliable that Israel itself uses their estimates, and so does the American government, while simultaneously in the media consistently claiming that these Hamas Health Ministry numbers are false. You can't trust them because it's Hamas. The UN and Hamas are not on a campaign to feed Gaza. They're on a campaign to stop the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation from the distribution of food in Gaza. Why? Because they want a monopoly. The GHF is a private nonprofit set up by the American and Israeli backing to deliver food. Let's admit it. It's an Israeli-American creature that is focused on feeding Gazans. He openly states this. Well, the Israelis have said they're not funding it. Are you saying that they are? I don't know if there's direct funding, but Israel is the organizer of the GHF. There are Israelis that have said they're funding it. For the record, there's members of the opposition party that have openly admitted that Israel is funding the GHF. Okay? There has been a lot of time spent denying that. Israel is behind this foundation, but the idea is noble, and it is to keep humanitarian aid from becoming a weapon for the survival of Hamas. Now, here's the question for you. Why is the UN obsessed with the GHF? The hundreds of people who have been killed at GHF sites, asks Isaac. It's not even hundreds. It's actually more than 1,000 at this point. No, this is what Hamas claims and what the New York Times quotes. By the way, the vast majority of people killed in the GHF were killed by Hamas. Hamas tried to kill and shoot people who came to take food from the GHF because the purpose is to save Hamas's regime. American mercenaries at this point have openly revealed that they are the ones who are fucking shooting the Palestinians that are at those aid delivery locations. American mercenaries have openly revealed that the IDF is also shooting tank shells into crowds. The Israeli occupying forces' own veterans that have directly participated in this shooting at Palestinian civilians at the point of aid delivery have openly admitted that they are the ones who are shooting at people who are trying to get aid. There are videos, there are countless hours of videos of unarmed civilians begging for their lives, trying to get to the point of aid distribution while being shot at with Israeli weapons. The idea that this is actually Hamas that's shooting people is so insane that it requires you to close your eyes, plug your ears, and just assume that the IDF soldier on camera that's directly shooting at Palestinian children that are trying to get aid at the GHF drop sites is actually secretly a Hamas militant. Hamas has actually overtaken Israeli Merkava tanks and are driving the Israeli Merkava tanks into crowds and shooting the Israeli Merkava tanks at Palestinian civilians. That's what the expectation is. That's what you're supposed to believe here. It is fucking insane. The GHF contractor told Senator Van Hollen directly that he was directly told the GHF's client was the IDF and to never disobey them again. Okay? His name is Aguilar, the Green Beret, who came out and is on video, on the record, talking about all of the numerous atrocities that the GHF has contributed to in the Strip at aid sites. Okay? Yeah, this is a good point. If Hamas was actually doing all of the shooting, then Israel would have no reason to not let journalists see it. Former U.S. Green Beret Anthony Aguilar says he routinely witnessed Israeli forces firing artillery tank rounds and mortar rounds in the crowds of unarmed, starving Palestinians at GHF aid sites in Gaza. I witnessed war crimes, the GHF security contractor told the BBC, calling the attacks indiscriminate and the most brutality he's seen in his life.
Into a crowd of people, destroying a car of civilians that were simply driving away from the site. I witnessed mortar rounds being fired at the crowds of people to keep them controlled.
As a professional soldier.
Here, this is the Aguilar, Chris Van Hollen conversation, okay? This is how Aguilar found out that the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation client was the IDF. At one of the distribution sites in Gaza, some starving kids have been lifted up onto a berm to save them from being crushed. An Israeli soldier tells the GHF soldiers to get them down, or he would. Aguilar tells him to calm down, so the Israeli official radios a nearby IDF position to shoot the kids. Aguilar intervened and prevented the murder. One of his superiors then took him outside and told him to never say no to the client again.
Directly to my face that our client is the IDF.
Your client is the IDF.
Our client is the IDF. And this came out in a discussion once where I was in the control room. I was on I was on control room duty that day.
They're mercenaries. So yes, their client is the IDF. This is how mercenary work works. This is why the term mercenary is one that is repulsive to the average person. Your business and your job is to sometimes kill children at the behest of the Israeli military. If that's your client and the Israeli military wants to kill children, you can't say no.
Shifted responsibilities on a rotational base. So I was in there that day with the radio observing site number 2 distribution. A Palestinian man had picked up some children to let them step on his shoulders to get onto a berm because they were being crushed in the crowd. Site 2 is very small, smallest of all 4 sites. And these children are being...
Remember, if you were unfamiliar with the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, you might have seen them on Ethan Klein's Instagram stories as he consistently kept defending the GHF with all of its press releases over and over again, adding me on his Instagram stories saying, here are your favorites. The GHF says, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation says it's Hamas that's doing the killing. When it was actually the GHF in unison with the Israeli Defense Force, which is their client, that was actually doing the killing at these aid distribution sites. He kept doing that over and over again until this past week when the starvation campaign had reached its boiling point and it finally broke through to Western audiences. He turned around and literally fucking brought up Sudan. Okay? Hasan trying to not bring up E or D every 30 minutes, impossible difficulty. Do you think that we should let propagandists for this genocidal campaign get away with it simply because they're fucking online propagandists? Do you feel like this doesn't have any fucking bearing on the story at all? Because at this point, it's no longer drama. At this point, it is quite literally a person that is spending every single waking moment defending Israel. And then recently, once the starvation campaign became so overt, he posted this. Ethan Klein resorts to Zionist deflection tactic. What about Sudan? Trump has the ability to end the famine in Gaza with a phone call. Negative media attention made Western leaders force Israel to let in more aid. Why the hell does that bother pro-Palestinian Ethan Klein? Meanwhile, in Sudan, also strange that Ethan shared a screenshot of an outdated version of a wiki article. The page currently cites 700,000 as the number of children malnourished, not deaths. So where did Ethan get this screenshot? He likely copied it from an anti-Palestinian Hasbaras. Also funny to see multiple removed and downvoted posts on the H3 subreddit from fans that haven't yet recognized the Kleins are demented Zionist Hasbaras who are deeply invested in defending Israel. Was Hila praising IDF killing child-killing pilots not enough for a wake-up call? What is the context of Ethan posting about malnutrition deaths in Sudan? I don't understand the point of this post. Is he pulling a whataboutism with Gazans of Sudan's famine? I understand he's trying to make a statement about his enemy's virtue signaling, but why would you compare one famine to another when there's plenty of other low-hanging fruit to show hypocrisy? Just because someone says that they're a stalwart ally of the Palestinians doesn't change their output. If their output is entirely around constantly deflecting the attention away from Israel, constantly defending other groups that are designed to work alongside Israel that is doing a genocide, then you're not actually fucking anti-genocide at all. You're pro-genocide. Yeah, this was the other thing that I saw. Has Ethan Klein ever even once mentioned Sudan prior to the world finally beginning to take issue with Israel's forced starvation in Gaza, now that it's reached the point of mass death? Just because this person is an online content creator doesn't change the reality that they are actively and deliberately defending Israel, okay? Defending Israel's starvation campaign, defending Israel's genocide. Before this, he kept repeatedly posting, and I'm sure someone has the link for it, kept repeatedly posting GHF statements, GHF press releases at a time when, if he had actually done a little bit of research, he would have recognized that the United Nations was literally screaming about the GHF being a scheme, an illegal war crime scheme. Here it is. Hasan Piker, come get your freedom fighters. GHF statement on operations. Hamas is the reason hundreds of thousands of hungry Gazans were not fed today. The group issued direct threats against GHF operations. CC at Hasan Piker, your friends at Hamas are in desperate need of spin. Urgent statement from the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. The very same evil entity that we are currently talking about, Ethan Klein has literally fucking defended over and over again. Now that it's getting to a point where it's indefensible in other people's eyes as well, finally, Western media is like actively talking about this, okay? He has now moved on to deflect the attention away to Sudan, which is the rapid support forces in Sudan also doing a man-made created famine. They are doing this with Israel's ally, the United Arab Emirates. The United Arab Emirates, which gets all of its weapons from the United States of America, is backing another ethnic cleansing campaign in Sudan. The reason why you don't get to hear much from Sudan is because, once again, it is America's ally doing it, okay? And it's very strange that a country that is aligned with the UAE, Israel, and its defenders will only simply use the famine that is taking place in Sudan, that is, again, backed by the United Arab Emirates, an ally of Israel. They only bring this up as a deflection point to be like, well, you care about the famine in Gaza. Why don't you care about the famine in Sudan? And it's crazy because we have talked about the famine in Sudan. He has not. The only reason why he brings this up is because other people are talking about what's going on in Gaza. It's just a prop. It's a mechanism of deflection. It is alarming how most people don't fucking see it.
Crushed, and he picked them up there and put them up on the berm. And the Israeli Defense Forces liaison officer in the main control center with us comes up to the screen that I'm watching and he says, "Tell your men to get them down." I was like, "We got this under control." I was like, "I know they know what they're doing. No, they're children. Let's calm down. Mm-hmm. Get them down now, or I will." Well, there's no IDF on the site, so I didn't take it as much more than just being, bombastic and like, okay, like, hey, we got this. He leaves and goes to his desk in the operations center, and he gets on the radio and he speaks something on the radio. It was in Hebrew. I don't speak Hebrew. One of the contractors that was there was American that did speak Hebrew, and he notifies me. He said, "Hey, he just told the snipers at the IDF position, because the site number 2 is co-located with an Israeli base." Mm-hmm. He said, he just told the snipers to take these kids out. I was like, "On the radio?" He's like, "Yeah." This lieutenant colonel then comes back up and he says, "Get them down." And I look at him and I say, "Did you just call on the radio and tell your men to shoot them?" And he said, "I'm going to take care of this if you don't." I said, "You are not going to shoot. You are not going to shoot children. You're also not going to shoot because if your men miss, you're going to hit others. You're not going to shoot." Thank God we didn't come to the conclusion of figuring out whether he would or not, because the children jumped down and ran off of the site. They didn't want to be there. They were unarmed. They didn't have shoes. One wasn't even wearing a shirt. They were starving. The chief operations officer for Safe Reach Solutions, our higher headquarters, so to speak, in the contract, beckoned me outside with him, and he looked at me in the face and he said, "Never say no to the client." And I asked him, I was like, "I didn't know the client was in there. Who's here? Did Johnny Moore come to visit?"
Right.
And he said, "No, the IDF." I was like, "The IDF are our client?" He said, "Yes, we work for them." A light bulb went off in my head, because
here is further. Green Beret Anthony Aguilar recounts how a 5-year-old Palestinian kissed his hand to thank him for the food Aguilar gave him. Seconds later, Israeli soldiers shot and killed the starving child.
And he put down the little food he has. You notice he doesn't have a box. He doesn't have a box of food. He has half of a bag of rice that he found on the ground, a broken bag, half a bag of lentils that he found on the ground, and he was thanking us. Thank you. This little boy, from where he came from, walked 12 kilometers to get there, just to get there. 12 kilometers. Look at this boy. And when he got there, he thanked us.
This is what Trump is talking about when he says he gave $60 million, by the way. He's talking about the GHF. That's what they actually added a spending package on. This aid distribution death trap. Okay? Understand. When he says, "Oh, we gave $60 million, he's talking about the $30 million that the Trump administration gave recently, this past week, is the GHF aid distribution scheme so they can fund the mercenaries.
The remnants and the small crumbs that he got. And he sets them down on the ground, because I was kneeling at this point, and he sets his food down, and he places his hands on my face, on the side of my face, on my cheeks, these frail, skeleton, emaciated hands, dirty. And he puts them on my face, and he kissed me. He kissed me, and he said, "Thank you," in English. "Thank you." And he collected his items, and he walked back to the group.
And then he was shot at with pepper spray and tear gas and stun grenades and bullets shot at his feet and in the air. And he runs away scared. And the IDF were shooting at the crowd. So they're shooting to control the population that's along the Marag corridor. And as they're doing that, they're shooting into this crowd. And Palestinian civilians, human beings, are dropping to the ground, getting shot. And Amir was one of them. Amir walked 12 kilometers to get food, got nothing but scraps, thanked us for it, and died. I served in the army for 25 years. I've been shot 3 times in combat. I'm pretty tough. This gets me every time because, to what you're saying, the dehumanization. And what I want to say to the American people and to the people of Israel, I've been there. I have touched them. I have talked to them. The civilians in Gaza that are getting the food, they are starving. They are not animals. They are human beings. And they're being treated like animals. We treat these civilians in Gaza worse, with less dignity than we treated the ISIS fighters that surrendered in Baghuz Fakani in Syria in 2018. This young boy, this is on May 28th on secure distribution site number 2. The aid had been distributed. A lot of people had left. You see behind, there's a crowd of people still with their boxes, kind of getting ready to leave. And this little boy, his name is Amir, and he was standing, he was with the crowd.
I think this is why I always say, if the New York Times accurately covered what was going on since October 7, you would have a lot more people who feel as angry and as resentful as you do. There is a reason why so many people have come after me since October 7, 2023, trying to get me deplatformed. It's because I have, in my coverage, first and foremost, always relied on Palestinian reporters, Palestinian journalists, Palestinians who are basically describing their own demise, their own conditions on the ground. On the other hand, a lot of mainstream media outlets have entirely relied on the Israeli narrative. From Israeli envoys, Israeli officials, Israeli military commanders that go on television and go to the New York Times to specifically contextualize why these violent incidents are taking place and how it's actually normal and how it's actually good. And if it's bad, it's just a mistake. It shouldn't be left up to Americans to finally have the Western world pay attention to this, okay? But that is the unfortunate reality, that only when an Israeli military official anonymously gives a quote to the New York Times does it get reported on as though it is the God's honest truth. Only when it's an American soldier that reveals this information do people actually start paying attention to it. Unfortunately, real journalism relies on covering all angles. Real journalism relies on refusing to cover a blanket statement coming from a government entity that has consistently lied over and over again. Israel has lied so much, as does every government, okay? This is not exclusive to Israel, but it's crazy that Israel has lied in such immediately dismissible ways that no institution that cares about the truth, no reputable outlet should ever take their word at face value. After the 11th time, you're supposed to go, I think you're lying about this like you did the past 11 times. And yet, even to this day, 22 months into this ethnic cleansing and starvation campaign, this genocide, the only way that you can get any information that is at least close to the truth of what has been going on for months and months on the ground in Gaza is when an Israeli official admits to it. It is devastating. What a great abdication of responsibility from Western news reporters. And I know people in these newsrooms. I know people that are actively fighting, that are trying to get the truth out, that are trying to get the word out, and they get stopped every step of the way. It is alarming, but it is also the reason for why. It is alarming, but it's also the reason for why so many people do not trust mainstream institutions anymore. And for what purpose? The New York Times does this ass-covering operation for the Israeli state only to have defenders of Israel consider it a Hamas newspaper anyway. The Bill Ackman point comes to mind. The New York Times, finally wrote a report on famine because it's become undeniable. And because these guys obviously have an interest in presenting themselves as a credible institution, when too many people are talking about an issue, they have to cover it. So they did. They covered the famine that is taking place in Gaza. In the process, they basically turned around and actually got yelled at. Okay, they got yelled at nonstop because one of the people, one of the victims, one of the child victims of starvation, one of the child victims of starvation was a child with a genetic disability. Israel thinks this is a good way to flood the market with a counter narrative that, like, people are lying. People are lying about what's going on. Here, Bill Ackman has been posting about this nonstop. They did this thing, okay, where the New York Times basically stated that the photo, the viral image of one of the hundreds of children that have starved to death also had a genetic condition, okay? A genetic disability. These guys pushed this narrative by way of the New York Post and all these other Hasbara institutions, okay, to criticize the New York Times. The New York Times buckled. And in the process, they wrote this editor's note. The editor's note isn't as bad as I think people are reading it as, because it doesn't actually lend credence to the fucking smears, but I think it's ridiculous that they even had to post an editor's note such as this one after all of the reaction and the retaliation from pro-Israel groups. We have appended an editor's note to a story about Mohammed Zakaria al-Mutawak, a child in Gaza who was diagnosed with severe malnutrition. After publication, the Times learned he also had a pre-existing health problem. Read more below. Okay? Children in Gaza are malnourished and starving, as New York Times reporters and others have documented. We recently ran a story about Gaza's most vulnerable civilians, including Mohammed Zakaria al-Mutawak, who is about 18 months old and suffers from severe malnutrition. We have since learned new information, including from the hospital that treated him and his medical records, and have updated our story to add context about his pre-existing health problems. This additional details gives readers a greater understanding of his situation. Our reporters and photographers continue to report from Gaza bravely, sensitively, and at personal risk so that the readers can see firsthand the consequences of war. There was no reason to add this. Okay? The mother of the child has been interviewed. She said, "My son was born in December 2023 during the war without any chronic illnesses. Doctors diagnosed him with macrocephaly, which they said was caused by nutritional deficiencies during pregnancy due to the Israeli war. Over the past 4 months of displacement, his condition worsened due to the severe shortage of food. That is when he developed acute malnutrition." She shared with Misbar a photo of the child taken before his health deteriorated. This pre-existing condition to which the Times refers is, in fact, deliberate starvation by Israel's genocidal war criminals. Now understand something. Does this change the reality? Does this change the narrative at all? Yes. So Israel's military campaign has not only caused these conditions to arise in children, but it's also still starving that child, even if that child had a genetic predisposition that had nothing to do with Israel's actions. What are we talking about? Israel's still starving that fucking child. The only way you think this is an appropriate counter messaging campaign is if your head is slammed so far up other pro-Israeli accounts assholes that you think this does not look horrifying to the average individual that is watching from afar, that is shocked by the images of emaciated children. That's what's so crazy about this. These guys literally do not understand that people with a fucking soul out there that see these starving children and then hear someone who's defending Israel go, nah, that starving child also had a genetic condition. They don't look at that and go, oh my God, I've been duped. I guess that child with a genetic condition deserved to fucking die because of Hamas. They don't see it like that. They look at you and think you are 1,000,000 times worse than Hamas. Okay? Which is true, because you are. You are. If you defend Israel at any point, but especially now, you are 1,000,000 times worse. 1,000,000 times worse. It is ridiculous. It's not even comparable, okay? It is not even remotely comparable. No more but Hamas. That does not work. That never should have worked, but it certainly does not work at this stage. Ridiculous. But here is Bill Ackman. Even after the New York Times wrote this thing that they weren't even supposed to fucking add onto the story, the New York Times has caused enormous harm, and this is apparently the best they can do to correct their malfeasance. No apology, no acknowledgement for the harm they've caused. What harm? Israel should bring libel suits against the New York Times and other publications. These are open and shut cases. The only thing worse than starving people to death is reporting on people being starved to death. That's your argument? Your name will become a curse to future generations, just like Hitler and Eichmann. Israel said one of the starvation victims died from hypermetabolism related to diabetes. The main way to treat hypermetabolism is consistent with high caloric meals. If you think this is insane, this is a German, still unbanned Twitch streamer calling himself a journalist and human rights activist. This has been ongoing for years with this Nazi. What? This is a German Twitch streamer? What? German journalist echoes Nazi propaganda by implying Gaza's kids starved by Israel are dying due to genetics and cousin marriages. But the EU sanctioned me at Germany's request for pro-Palestine journalism, accusing me of creating social and religious discord. After seeing so many children with hereditary diseases in Gaza in recent days for which Israel is not responsible, perhaps we should explain to the people in Gaza that one should not marry their first cousin or relatives in general, even if Muhammad the Prophet is said to have done so. This is, among many other things, the reason for the many sick children. In addition, such cousin marriages lead to a lower IQ between 5 and 13 points. Child mortality is up 50% higher, and it results in physical deformities. Not just a Twitch streamer, he's also a German politician. I don't know who the fuck this guy is, this Tobias Hutch guy. But I know everything I need to know about him and his fucking worldview. This is literally Nazi propaganda. But instead of saying this about the Jews, he is saying this about an appropriate target, a target that you can say this about, which is Muslims as a whole, but certainly the Palestinians that are currently experiencing the fucking Holocaust. Let's get back to Isaac Chodener's conversation with this far-right propagandist for Netanyahu. By the way, I'm not the only one to understand this. President Biden in October 2023 actually forced Israel to provide humanitarian aid, right? And then he said, I quote, if Hamas diverts or steals the assistance, they will have demonstrated once again that they have no concern for the welfare of the Palestinian people. And it will end. As a practical matter, it will stop the international community from being able to provide this aid. For a long time, people have been saying that there is going to be mass starvation in Gaza. Even Netanyahu a few months ago warned about reaching a point of starvation after they'd been complete shut off of aid into the territory. Subsequently, more aid was allowed in. You're saying all these warnings were essentially not correct. I say that Gaza is not the United States or Israel or Albania, in which the regime takes care of the wellness of its people. But you're aware there was a complete cutoff of aid for months, right? There was a cutoff from March to May. But here's the question. If the cutoff was between March and May, how come the hunger and starvation began in July? In which Isaac reports multiple aid experts told the New Yorker that the worst starvation would arrive sometime after a total aid cutoff because they have stockpiles of food. That's not how fucking starvation works. As Arif Hussein of the World Food Program told the New Yorker, it is a delayed effect. Households and markets will have some stocks, which they run out of if no further supplies arrive. And the answer is because Hamas steals the UN humanitarian aid in order to sell it or store it and sell it later. To which Isaac reports, the New York Times reported last week that the Israeli military never found proof that the Palestinian militant group had systematically stolen aid from the United Nations, the biggest supplier of emergency assistance to Gaza for most of the war, according to 2 senior Israeli military officials and 2 other Israelis involved in the matter. In fact, the Israeli military officials said that the UN aid delivery system, which Israel derided and undermined, was largely effective in providing food to Gaza's desperate and hungry population. So the problem was fully created by Hamas, Segal continues to say. It continues to lie about. Not by an Israeli decision to genocide in Gaza. Israel is the only country on earth that provides humanitarian aid to the enemy in the middle of a war. It is the only country on earth. You're not providing aid to the enemy in the middle of a war. You're providing aid to an entire population of people that you are literally at war with. You are openly saying you're doing a genocide. The question is whether Israel will allow humanitarian aid to enter Gaza. They weren't paying for the UN aid. Many countries allow foreign aid to enter war zones. The only one interested in feeding Gazans these days is the GHF. There have been some right-wing ministers in the government, such as Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, who've made comments about how aid should not be allowed into Gaza. I assume you're going to say that's not the official policy of the government, correct? He says, right, exactly. Okay, but do Smotrich and Ben-Gvir want the genocide you said wasn't going on? It's a little confusing to have people in the government essentially saying out loud what people are accusing Israel of doing. This is the nature of the parliamentary regime and a multi-party coalition. Just to put things straight, Smotrich didn't say the humanitarian aid should not enter. He said that it should be done through the GHF. At multiple points, Isaac Chotiner butts in and does a correction. At multiple points during the war, Smotrich has blocked or spoken out against aid entering Gaza, and in 2024 stated, "No one in the world will allow us to starve 2 million people, even though it might be justified and moral in order to free the hostages." Remember that famous quote from Bezalel Smotrich? Ben-Gvir actually did say this, along with many other stupid things, in the first month of the war. He's just trying to shift the responsibility away from Netanyahu to Ben-Gvir and make it seem as though Netanyahu is simply stuck at the mercy of the far-right coalition that he's created. Okay? Remember, it's all bullshit. The majority of Israeli society knows that this is going on and are on board with it. They might change their attitude now that it's getting more coverage in the Western news. But up until this moment, they were fully aware of what was going on, and they wanted it to happen. It's not just Bezalel Smotrich. It's not just Ben-Gvir. It's not just Netanyahu. The Jewish demographic of Israel, by and large, agrees with this starvation policy. Okay? There are those who oppose it. That is true. And their numbers are growing, for sure. But throughout the past 22 months, there has been overwhelming support for this. Make no mistake. Israel supporters' insistence that the government is responding to the global outcry over starvation simply goes against what Israeli leaders are actually doing. They're working on a new plan for a siege of the Strip, which would, again, cut off all humanitarian aid. Netanyahu held a cabinet meeting on Monday evening devoted to Gaza, during which the military presented a new plan for a siege of the Strip, which would, again, cut off all humanitarian aid, according to the Khan broadcaster. This is not just the position of a big part of Netanyahu's coalition. It's the majority opinion of Jewish Israelis. Again, this is not my demographic predesignation. It is the Israeli government's demographic predesignation. Okay? They bracket off Israeli society in two. Okay? They say either you are Jewish, you're a Jewish Israeli, or you're Arab. When they say Arab, what they actually mean is Christian or Muslim. Okay? What they're actually referencing is Palestinian citizens of Israel. People that were given citizenship in 1948. Okay? This population of Muslims and Christians make up 25% of Israeli society. They are relegated to second-class status. Okay? They're talking about the Druze, they're talking about the Muslims, and they're talking about the Christians, the non-Jews, Jewish versus non-Jewish. The reason why they have this population designation is not just because Judaism is an ethno-religion. The reason why they do this is because they are an ethno-religious supremacist society. It's that simple. Even though the majority of Jews in Israel are Arab Jews, Jews of Arab background, Jews of Arab descent from the MENA region, they are categorized as Jews. Okay? They are not categorized as Arabs. I have had a conversation with someone who is of Arab descent, but is Jewish, if you recall. It was a teenager in Israel. And he actually got mad when I said, well, you're Arab. Like, your family is from an Arabic country. Like, from an Arab country. And he was like, no, I'm Jewish. The categorization for Arab Jews in Israeli society, the specific designation for it is Mizrahi. Okay? There are Ashkenazi Jews, Eastern European Jews that are white, many of them also living in the United States of America, the majority. There are Persian Jews as well, okay? And there are Arab Jews that are Mizrahi and Sephardic. Okay, Sephardic Jews are from Spain or by way of Spain through the MENA region. But these designations, these separate designations are all bracketed under Jewish. Okay? Full rights. But in any case, I sidestepped away from the Israeli demographics because I always have to repeat that point because I think it's pretty illuminating about how Israel treats its population. This is not just the position of a big part of Netanyahu's coalition, it's a majority opinion of Jewish Israelis. Here's one IDI poll from February 2024 showing 68% oppose aid into Gaza. A Channel 13 survey from May 2025 shows 53%, but it included Palestinian citizens of Israel. Palestinian citizens of Israel are the non-Jews in Israel that have Israeli citizenship. Okay? So understand that this position is not an unpopular one. It is one that is popularly backed by the Israeli population. Regardless of what some people try to present it as. Oh, this is like not the majority opinion. This is just like a loud minority or anything like that. It's fucking bullshit. Not that it even matters. It does not matter. You want to know why it doesn't matter? Because if America said tomorrow, stop this, cut it out, you're done, Israel would have to cut it out. Okay? Make no mistake. Yair Golan, the center-left politician, said on the fourth day of the war that we should not allow humanitarian aid into Gaza until the hostages are back. So it was a consensus. If you look at the indictments in The Hague against Israel, you would see many quotes, and many of them belong to the center-left, which is correct, by the way. He's trying to defend this human rights violation by pointing to the rest of Israeli politicians as well. Center left my ass. This is what's confusing. If no aid should be let in, then people are going to starve. And you're saying that a consensus in Israel, but you're also saying Israel's not going to starve anyone. No, because it's two different things. First of all, there's a difference between a war that lasts, I don't know, a few weeks and one that lasts 2 years. And second, it's theoretical because when President Biden arrived in Israel in the second week of the war, there was a decision made by the Israeli cabinet that humanitarian aid would enter Gaza. Israel cut off aid completely, as we talked about, for over 2 months between March and May. And then after that, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation was set up. And it was set up in part because Netanyahu didn't want to be seen as allowing aid into Gaza. That's why it was given this American imprimatur, because he didn't want to piss off the far right, which doesn't want aid to enter. No, not at all. This was a Smotrich initiative. So why is Israel denying they are behind it? I guess because it would not help Gazans if the food had an Israeli flag on it. Okay, go on. That seems... There are rumors that Israel is funding the GHF. I haven't seen proof so far, but Israel is behind it. But I have to ask you something. You spoke about 20 children who died a year ago in Gaza from dehydration. If it happened, it's a tragedy. I don't think there is anyone who wants to see babies and children die. Again, bullshit. Israeli society or Israeli politicians, especially right-wing Israeli politicians, do absolutely want to see Israeli babies and children die, Palestinian babies and children die, because they have said as so. They've literally stated their desire for this. So the idea that they don't want to see this is fucking bullshit. Many people in the Israeli cabinet, maybe people in the Israeli cabinet, but beyond that, there isn't a single Israeli minister that wants to see babies die. You know how I know it? Because Israel has a nuclear weapon. If Israel really wanted to have a genocide, it would have done it already. I know it's a waste of time to speak to a liberal news outlet in the United States about the numbers. You won't find a single initiative by an Israeli cabinet minister that wants to kill babies on purpose. You know about Ben-Gvir and the wedding. Which one? Where there was dancing. Which one? Pretending to stab Palestinians. It was a disgusting event in which someone stabbed the picture of a baby, and it was disgusting. This was in 2015 at a wedding that Ben-Gvir attended. Dancing guests held up a photograph of a Palestinian baby who had been burned to death by right-wing Israeli extremists several months earlier, and one guest stabbed the picture with a knife. Ben-Gvir was the lead arsonist attorney. He later called the display at the wedding stupidity. And there were indictments because Israel is a law and order state. Ben-Gvir didn't do it. Maybe he participated. I wouldn't have taken part in an event like this. That's good to know. Okay, there are 7 big reports in the New Yorker about the so-called starvation in Gaza, but there are 0 reports about a genocidal event, the massacre of Druze in Syria, over the last few weeks, and 0 reports about 7 million displaced persons in Congo. Bitch, you don't care about any of that. What do you mean? Your Honor, you're accusing me of being a serial killer. And while that might be true, think about all the children that have also been killed by other serial killers. That doesn't matter. You are the one who is currently being examined here. It is your individual crimes. You can't just turn around and go, what about all the other people that are doing murders? That is fucking ridiculous. I just want to offer the idea that the West preoccupied with the state of Israel murdering and genociding Gazans and Palestinians, even when there is no proof. You just said so-called starvation. In your own piece, you quote someone saying, mass starvation seems inevitable without a change of strategy. But it's a little confusing because if Hamas decides who eats, then why is Israel changing its policy? If Hamas has all the food, it can do whatever it wants. Why has there been panic in official Israeli circles that things are getting out of hand? Hamas does it, but the world blames Israel for it. But why will a policy change by Israel matter if Hamas is controlling everything? Yeah, that's literally what Ethan Klein had on a story talking about Sudan. Because once you flood the area with food, you actually prevent this argument from being heard. There's footage today from the markets in central Gaza in which there's plenty of bread and flour and food and each and every kind of commodity. Isaac writes, when I followed up to ask what footage he was referring to, he sent me a clip that he said was from the Abu Ali Express, which Haaretz has called a news channel for psyops. The video appears to show two young men in a room containing some food supplies, putting small snack packages in a bag. In 2021, Ben Gvir tweeted a photo of two of you together and said that you signed a personal dedication for him in the book you had written. What was it? I don't really remember. I sold 80,000 copies of the book. Anyway, I'm going to skip that part. Let's take a step back. As you see it, what is the long-term goal of the war at this point? The long-term goal is to dismantle Hamas and Gaza both militarily and as a regime. The Times Magazine had a big piece a few weeks ago basically saying that this war has been continuing for political reasons for well over a year, and that Netanyahu essentially knew that there was nothing left to accomplish militarily a year ago. And one thing that's strange to me is that so much of the debate, both in America and Israel, includes these impassioned arguments about the purpose of the war. But the article and much other reporting about Netanyahu has made me think it's not even clear he believes he can truly dismantle Hamas. What do you make of that dissonance? The smartest thing for a politician to do, especially Netanyahu, is to win this war as fast and as decisively as possible. It is very unpopular to have an ongoing war, which is bullshit. Israeli society literally gets behind and rallies around the flag anytime Benjamin Netanyahu chooses to actively fucking decide to bomb another country, Israeli society by and large gets behind him. Also, the idea that you want to disband Hamas is also bullshit. They don't want Hamas to disband. Hamas has said that they would disband. They've literally said that they would disband and allow a technocratic committee to take place and take over the control of the Gaza Strip. They've literally said that as a condition for the ceasefire. Benjamin Netanyahu refused to allow that to happen because if Hamas goes away, they literally, or if the hostages are released and Hamas goes away, then there's no other reason to continue this fucking death and destruction campaign, because the ultimate goal is to ethnically cleanse the entire fucking strip. Okay? It is to militarily occupy the Gaza Strip. It is to purge the Gaza Strip of all Palestinians. Now, the question is there an alternative for a faster end to the war? And there is one, that Israel withdrawing to the original borders, thus leaving Hamas free to rearm itself. We'd exchange all the hostages for every single terrorist and murderer who is imprisoned in Israel, including children, by the way. He's talking about children. Israel has 10,000 plus Palestinians under administrative detention with no real trial whatsoever that they have kidnapped. 2,000 plus of them that Israel has kidnapped since October 7, as a matter of fact. They picked them up from the Palestinian citizens of Israel. They picked them up from the West Bank, specifically as a bargaining chip. That's how little they care about the safety and security and dignity of Palestinians. They do not treat them as anything but fucking bargaining chips. The Israeli government has allowed for literal teenagers to be detained indefinitely, permanently. Okay? There are so many war crimes and so many things that are otherwise considered completely illegal in this nightmare, this hellish dystopian nightmare of a fucking country that is just regular practice. In my opinion, and Netanyahu's opinion, and in the opinion of many Israelis, this would necessarily lead to yet another October 7 if they just fucking withdraw from Gaza. So they have to ethnically cleanse Gaza. Oops, nothing else that they can do. After doing those horrible things, it would pave the way for another event. Even the leaders of the opposition, most of them, when you ask them whether they would end the war and have the same borders, say no. This is why you support moving all Gazans from Gaza. No, I don't support moving all Gazans from Gaza. You commented on Trump's proposal to remove Gazans from Gaza, that there is no way in the world that we could have hoped for something better. But Trump did not offer deportation. He offered immigration. The fact now is that Gazans are not allowed to leave Gaza. Egypt blocks all the roads. Egypt blocks all the roads. You block all the roads. You make Egypt block all the roads. All I want to do is let Gazans be like Isaac or Amit and to live wherever they want. If it's Gaza, so be it. If it's another country, so be it. Now, this is also bullshit, and here's the reality. The reason why this is bullshit, and unfortunately, this is the extent of Isaac Chotiner's worldview, and it's this major limitation, is that he could just very quickly turn around and say there is a current proposal that the Israeli Knesset has fielded that dictates a concentration camp being created in the Rafah area. This concentration camp will house all of the remaining Palestinians, and its sole purpose is to deny them freedom of travel unless they are being deported out of the Gaza Strip. That is the current Israeli policy. Trump said they would not be permitted to return to Gaza. First of all, I'm not a spokesperson for Trump. You said you could not have hoped for something better. I support the idea of letting Gazans emigrate. And that's where it ends. And while we were having this back and forth, while we were reading this, another country, this time Canada, has mentioned their intention to recognize the state of Palestine at the UN General Assembly in September, subject to commitment by the Palestinian Authority to conduct reforms, Canadian Prime Minister says. Once again, this probably resembles the bullshit French conditional state recognition. You cannot do a shitty state recognition, a false state recognition without actual sovereignty. You cannot do this if you are still, one, arming the IDF, continuing to fucking fund and facilitate the Israeli society broadly. No, it's the French one that originally started. And then the British one came. But the British one was even worse than that because its conditions were, we won't even recognize the fucking state of Palestine if Israel allows aid to come in. Two-state solution document endorsed by France, European, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Qatar, the Arab League, circulated at UN and revealed by Times of Israel, calls for dissolving UNRWA without implementing the right of return for Palestinian refugees. I explain. This is Ali Abunima of the Electronic Intifada, okay, one of the more reliable outlets in terms of covering what goes on the ground in Palestine. The document talks about the achievement of a just solution to the Palestinian refugee issue without mentioning or reaffirming the right of return. This is long established peace process code for abrogating the right of return, resettling Palestinian refugees outside Palestine so that Jewish demographic supremacy is not threatened, and at best, monetary compensation. It talks about UNRWA handing over its duties, not to the government of an independent Palestinian state, but to prepared and empowered Palestinian institutions in the Palestinian territory. In other words, all this takes place prior to the supposed independence of a supposed Palestinian state. It is a formula for dismantling any international institutions and frameworks that protect Palestinian rights. There is much more in this document revealing its anti-Palestinian hostility, including demanding the disarmament of the resistance and handing over its weapons under occupation to the Palestinian Authority and endorsing a demilitarized Palestinian state, while the occupier that is perpetrating a Holocaust retains all of its capacity for genocide. We know what that looks like. It's called the West Bank, and 40,000 Palestinians have been displaced since October 7 in the West Bank. Israeli settlers, armed to the teeth by the Israeli government, getting weapons from the United States government, will go in and kill Palestinians and use Molotov cocktails to permanently displace Palestinians from their ancestral homes, and then the IDF will continue its bloodshed by killing the Palestinians that even are in the vicinity of the Israeli settlers. That's what they want across the board. In the same document endorsed by Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Jordan, Turkey, and European countries, etc., they demand that the Palestinian resistance completely disarm in the context of ending the genocide in Gaza and hand over its weapons to Israel's proxy, the Palestinian Authority. Remember, the Palestinian Authority is the governing body of the West Bank. The Palestinian Authority is a part of the Israeli security apparatus. Make no mistake. Regardless of what Benjamin Netanyahu says now about the Palestinian Authority, claiming that it's actually also just like Hamas and that no statehood should ever exist for Palestinians and Palestine in general, the Palestinian Authority is functionally an arm of the Israeli security apparatus. They work in unison with the Israeli security apparatus. They are the second least popular entity amongst Palestinians in the region. Obviously, the number one is Israel. There is no reference, of course, to the entity committing genocide and disarming. On the contrary, all this is meant to ensure the security of the genocidal settler colony and leave its victims totally defenseless. In other words, they make ending the genocide conditional on Israel achieving its goals. Make no mistake, while this is a step in the right direction, I have also stated that this is completely fucking ridiculous. It's only a matter of impact due to how little especially these Western European states have offered recognition to Palestinians and Palestine as a nation state. But it's definitely too little too late. And not only is it too little too late, but it's a bait and switch. Yeah, The Onion on October 10th, 2023, New York Times issues apology for reporting Palestinian deaths. 3 days after October 7, mind you. And here it is, the New York Times literally issuing an apology for reporting Palestinian deaths. The reason why they're engaging in this newfound recognition is because they need to soothe the interest of the masses. It has gotten to a point where people are understandably, unimaginably angry and resentful. They have destroyed all notion of the democratic process. Okay? The issue of Israel's genocide being committed with Western weapons is at the heart of the main contradiction that liberal democracies never want you to address. Overwhelming majorities of the public want this to be ended. Overwhelming majorities of the public kind of understand their government's involvement in this process, and yet the politicians themselves refuse to acknowledge it and refuse to do something about it when they have all of the power in the world to stop it.